Okay, today we're going to talk about Unit 1, Note 4, which is graphing inequalities. So now that we are kind of reviewed on how to graph lines, we're going to work on graphing inequalities, which really isn't that different. There's just a couple added steps. But before we really get into the bulk of it, let's just practice graphing lines in general. So number 1 is in slope-intercept form, which means we have our y-intercept and we have our slope. If it's just a number, remember that's the same thing as over 1. Okay, so this thing that's being added on right here, this 5, that's our y-intercept. So we're crossing the y-axis at 5. And then our slope is negative 3 over 1. So we're going down 1, 2, 3, and over 1. And so we can graph that line. Once you have 2 points, you have a line. Okay, once you have 2 points, you have a line. So let's take a look at example number 2. Well, in order for us to graph number 2, we have to have it solved for y. We don't know how to graph it in standard form. So I have negative x plus 3y is equal to 6. So in order to solve for y, first thing I want to do is I want to get that x over to the other side. So I'm going to add x to both sides. So then I get 3y is equal to x plus 6. Okay, I'm almost there. Last thing I have to do to solve for y is to divide by 3. So here I'm going to get 1 over 3x. Now I'm writing it this way so it makes it easier for me to see my slope. And then 6 divided by 3 gives me 2. So now I can graph that. Okay, I'm crossing the y-axis at 2. That's that number being added on, so I'm crossing the y-axis at 2. And then my slope is rise over run. So I'm going up 1 over 3. Up 1 over 1, 2, 3. Once I have 2 points, I have a line, and hopefully yours goes through the points better than mine does. I'm not claiming to be the best straight line drawer there ever was. All right? So this right here gets a little confusing. It's just x equals. So what does that mean? Well, that means no matter what happens, x has to equal 5. No matter what my x is, or no matter what my y is, my x has to be 5. If I ever have anything that is just an x, there's no y in it, I have a vertical line. So on my x-axis, which is right here, I want to find where x is 5, which is, so there's my x-axis, I just highlighted it for you. I'll relabel it. So I want to find where my x is 5, which is right here. So I'm going to have a vertical line at x equals 5. So if it's just an x, it's a vertical line. Okay, so likewise, if it's just a y, if there's only a y in the equation, then you have a horizontal line at whatever the y value it is. We'll be practicing more with that as the work continues. So what do these symbols mean again? Okay, just take a look at them. You've written them down before, just trying to remember them. Again, this column on the right is what's going to help you with those word problems. So let's just pause the video, take a second to review those. So now we have inequalities with 2 variables. So this is that little chart on your notes. You don't have to write this down absolutely word for word, but write down what you need to know so that you can remember this. So, inequalities with 2 variables tend to look like what we were seeing when we were graphing lines, except now there's an inequality symbol. So they can be in standard form, they can be in slope-intercept form, okay, but they're going to have that inequality symbol. Since I have 2 variables, you can't just solve them like normal inequalities. We can't just get x by itself and say x is less than or equal to this. Okay, we have to actually graph them, and then we have to shade in our solution, which is what we're going to be working on today, is that shading in of the solution. All right, so let's start with some simple, straightforward, okay, we're already in slope-intercept form. So our first step is to put the equation in slope-intercept form. Well, since this is an easy option, that's done for us. Okay, so these are the steps to graphing inequalities right beneath the chart, and then we'll also be graphing number 4 simultaneously with this problem. Your second step is to decide which line to make. If you're going to use a dotted line. Okay, it's a dotted line if the inequality has less than or greater than. You're going to do a solid line if the inequality is less than or equal to or greater than or equal to. You notice how each of those symbols have a little line underneath it. That's why I remember it needs to be a solid line because of that line underneath it. So let's take a look at number 4. Well, number 4 has a less than or equal to symbol. So I know already that I need a solid line. Okay, so I'm just kind of working through number 4 as we write down our steps. Third step, decide where to shade. So we're deciding where to shade right now. Okay, it's up from the line if it's greater than or greater than or equal to. So here's how I look at it. If the alligator mouth, like it is on greater than or equal to, is eating the y, so that alligator mouth is eating the y, then we want to shade up. If the alligator mouth is eating away from the line, then we want to shade down. You could also just pick a point and test it and see if it works. That's another option. But I like to just figure out if I need to shade up or down. So it looks like for this one, I need to shade down. Look at number 4. The alligator is facing away from the y. It's not eating the y. So I need to shade down for number 4. Lastly, your last step then is to just graph that inequality. So let's go through and do that. So let's start by just graphing our line. We know our slope, our intercept is at y across the y-axis at 3. So we're going up 1, 2, 3. There's our y-intercept. Our slope is 2 or 2 over 1. So I'm going to go up 2 over 1. And then we already decided that I need a I need a solid line. What am I doing? Okay, we look, and that's why we decide these things in advance. Okay, so I need a solid line going through there. A solid line going through there. Okay, then it says that I need to shade down. So I'm just going to pick a spot on my line. I'm going to say here. And I'm going to go whoop, straight down from that line. Where I landed, okay, that's where I'm going to shade. So there's my graph, right there. Okay. So let's go ahead and take a look at this next one. So first of all, the alligator, first of all, let's look, and there's no line underneath there. Okay, there's no line underneath there. So I know a couple of things. I know that I'm going to have a dotted line, and then the alligator is eating my y. So I know I'm going to shade up. So I skipped the first step because that line there is already in slope-intercept form. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I am going to graph this line. I've made all the decisions that I need to. So I'm crossing the y-axis at -6. And then my slope, well, there's no coefficient with the x. That's the same thing as having a coefficient of 1, and it's going to be over 1. So now I'm going up 1 over 1 for my line. And I need to have a dotted line. And then from that dotted line, I need to shade up. So I'm going to pick a spot on my dotted line, and I'm going to go up. So that means that I'm shading up there. Okay. So that's it on that one. It's graphed. It's done. Okay. So next, here's just another better way of looking at solid versus dotted lines. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to graph these two lines for us, and I'm going to have you guys pick where you're going to shade. So for this first one, we have a solid line. So I'm going to cross the y-axis at 2, and then I have a slope of -4, which is the same as -4 over 1. Remember, the slope is always with the x. So I'm going down 2, or down 2 more, so I'm down 4 over 1, and I have a solid line. Now, I want you guys to pick where you need to shade. The alligator is eating the y. It's a greater than. So if you need to look back, it's a greater than symbol. What do you need to shade? Let's take a look at this second one. We're crossing the y-axis at -2, and then our slope is 1 over 2. So I'm going up 1 over 2, up 1 over 2. And it's not a greater than or equal to, it's just a greater than. So I'm going to have a dotted line. So the alligator is eating the y, and it's a greater than symbol. So you think to yourself, what are you going to shade? I'm going to leave that up to you guys. You decide where you're going to shade on numbers 6 and 7. So 8 and 9 make things a little bit more tricky, okay, because we have a greater than symbol. And it's not, or sorry, not because we have greater than symbol, because it's not in standard form. Or it is in standard form, not in slope-intercept form. So what we need to do is solve for y. So the first thing I'm going to do on this one is this is a positive 3x. So I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides so I get that y by itself. I'm working on it. then I get negative 2y is greater than negative 3x minus 6. Well, last thing I need to do to solve for y is to divide by a negative 2. Well, I just divided by a negative 2. You should have little alarm bells going off in your head. I'm doing an inequality, and I'm dividing by a negative. So, because I'm dividing by a negative, I need to flip that inequality symbol. I now have a less than. So, negative 3 over negative 2 for the slope right here, that's going to become a positive 3/2 x. And then negative 6 divided by negative 2 is going to become a positive 3. So that's the line I'm going to graph. So when you're graphing, when you're looking at your symbols, you want to look at your last thing that you did. You want to look at the last thing that you did. So I'm crossing the y-axis at 3, and then I'm going up 3 over 2. Okay, I don't have a line underneath my inequality, so it's going to be a dashed line. Now, I want to look at the last thing that I did. When I finished solving for y, I ended up with a less than symbol, which means I need to take this line and I need to go down. So I'm going to shade down from that line. So that right there is your answer. Let's take a look at this one. Okay, let's take a look at number 9. So to graph number 9, I'm going to subtract 5x from both sides. This is a positive 5x, so I want to do a negative 5x to get rid of it. So when I get y is less than or equal to negative 5x plus 10. So now I want to go and I want to graph 10 on my graph. Okay, well mine only goes up to 8. Sometimes things don't work out perfectly. I only have 8 squares, so maybe I'm not going to go up by 10. Maybe I'm going to go up by 2's. So I'm going to go up by 2's. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So now each square is representing 2 units, not 1. So now I have to be really careful when I'm using my slope. I have to go down 2, 4, 5 is just going to be halfway. And then I need to go over 1, which is halfway. So now there's my new line right there. So you have to be really careful with your slope when you change the scale. So notice I still went down 5, but I went down 5, including the fact that it was by 2's. Okay. So then I look, I have a line underneath, so I know I have a solid line. And then it's a greater, or sorry, it is a less than symbol. So I'm not shading, or the alligator is not E my Y, so I'm going to take a point on the line, and I'm going to shade down. So I'm shading on this side of the line. All right, last but not least, let's take a look at 10 and 11. I want you guys to solve these and graph them completely on your own. So solve each of those equations for y. Watch your negatives. If you divide by a negative, make sure you flip your sign. If you multiply by a negative, make sure you flip your sign. So I want you to graph those. Once you're done, take your quiz.